Hey guys! Okay, so a few weeks ago I recorded a video that covered off the 5 different options that people have if they're looking to start a new commercial use. If you haven't already watched that video, then go back and take a look at it because it kind of sets the scene for what we're going to be talking about today. If you have watched that video and the option, I think it was number 3, the small scale non-residential uses, if that option piqued your interest and you want to know more, then stay tuned because today that's exactly what we're going to cover off. Okay, so small scale non-residential uses. It's a bit of a mouthful. For whatever reason, ever since I recorded that previous video, we've had a bucket load of inquiries about them. Everyone's really excited about them. They can't wait to start this new use. Yeah, I think I might have been a little too positive, a little too happy in my previous video, and it may have given people the wrong impression. So I'm going to be honest. In today's video, I'm going to be a bit mean. I'm going to crush your hopes and dreams. I'm going to essentially give you a reality check. Because they aren't simple, they aren't cheap, they aren't easy, they are certainly not quick applications. And I want to make sure everyone understands that. Now, I'm not trying to be a biatch, I'm not trying to be rude, but the reality is I don't want you wasting your money and time and stressing over something that's never going to be approved. I would much rather give you that information early on, from the very beginning, so that you can focus your energy, and like I keep saying, time and money, on other ideas, on other opportunities. So, let's get started. Let's talk about the use. When it comes to small scale non-residential uses, you are limited to a maximum floor area of 250 square meters, which obviously seems rather large. It's a huge amount. When you compare it to the home business uses, where you're limited to 50 square meters, that's massive. 5 times, it's huge. Now, let me just clarify if I get my words out. I'll put RD, that stands for residential dwelling. Basically, council wants these uses to blend in with the surrounding area. They don't want them to stand out as obvious commercial buildings. So you're strongly encouraged, in other words, you have no choice, to locate them within existing dwelling houses, existing residential dwelling buildings. Council doesn't want these commercial looking structures popping up around the place. So, 250 square metre floor limit within existing residential dwellings. Nothing too scary so far? Pretty straightforward? Yeah. Okay, now we come to roads. Now I did mention this in the previous video, but I am going to clarify it again. They cannot be located on arterial roads. I'll shorthand it, just keep things nice and simple. Council does want them on district and suburban roads. So what does that mean essentially? We did a previous video on how to use Brisbane City Council's interactive mapping system. If you go back to that video, learn how to actually access the system, you turn on one of the overlays called road hierarchy. That one will show you what level or what category each of the roads are. Arterial roads are major roads. Think things like Gympie Road, Milton Road, those major networks. District and suburban roads are middle order roads, just those ones that are just off the arterial ones. And then the other category, which we haven't mentioned here, are neighbourhood roads. They're your really quiet suburban streets. They don't want them on those roads. They're not expressly saying don't put them there, because you could have it say it's a corner allotment, you could have it on one of these with a neighbourhood road on the other side. That's okay. But they definitely don't want them fronting any arterial roads, not on those major roads. So take note of that point, because that rules out so many of these opportunities here, okay? Make sure. Parking, okay, this is where we're really going to get unstuck. And this is where I think I gave people false hope in the previous video. The parking restrictions and requirements are pretty much, I can guarantee you now, going to kill the opportunities. So, when it comes, probably small scale non-residential uses, we're talking offices and shops. Probably offices more commonly, but shops as well. The parking rate, let me just stop for a second and write this down. For off and 5 per 100. I'll explain this in a second. For shop. Okay, 3 spaces for every 100 square meters of floor area that's occupied by an office. So if you're planning to use a building that's 250 square meters, the full allowable amount, you're looking at 9 car parks, because council obviously rounds up all the time. Most of these options that we've seen around the place, or most of the inquiries that have come across my desk, they're probably looking at maybe 120, 130 square metres, but that pushes you up to 6 car parks. Technically, there is a little room for negotiation there with council, but only a little bit. Don't count on it. And like I said, shops, 5 per 100, much, much higher. That's huge. Just trust me, it's huge. But not only do you need to account for the actual parking bays, you've got to account for the manoeuvring. So when it comes to non-residential properties, same thing with units, I guess, council wants to make sure that a vehicle can get on the site in a forward gear, it can get into the car park, it can manoeuvre out of the car park within 3 turns, and it can exit in a forward gear. Look at me, I'm dancing. Exit in forward gear. So you need to be able to enter in a forward gear, turn around within 3 manoeuvres, and exit in a forward gear. So what does that mean? Well, typically, if we've got a site like this, let me just get my bearings, each car park needs to be 5.4 metres in length. However, if you've got an obstruction like a fence or a boundary line along there, you also need plus 0.3 at the end there. So what you find is between the boundary and the end of the car parking space, you need a minimum of 5.7 metres. That's pretty big. Then for the width, you need a minimum of 2.6 metres. So just in case you haven't worked it out, these triangles here are meant to represent car parking spaces. So the way it works is the car drives in here, gets into the car space, manoeuvres out in a reversing motion, and then exits in a forward gear. This area here between the end of the car parking space and the edge of the aisle needs to be a minimum of 6.2 metres. So 5.7 plus 6.2, it starts to add up. It gets rather large. One final thing I'll point out, at the end of the aisle, you need to make sure you have a minimum of 2 metres. Like I said with the car parking requirements, there's a little bit of room negotiation. If you get a traffic engineer involved and they can provide a justification to reduce these dimensions, then yes, council may accept reduction, that's the word I'm looking for, reductions in terms of the dimensions. But for safety's sake, I would work off these dimensions for this, basically at this point in time. So, like I said, 5.7 for the bay, 6.2 at the rear for a car to be able to get into, and then 2 metres at the back for this final car to be able to turn around in before they exit backwards, or forwards. Oh, I should get that right, forwards. So when you start to see these numbers here, more often than not, the sites that I'm seeing people come to me with are only 10 metres in width. Dat plus dat plus dat equals more than 10 metres. You cannot get a car onto the site, into a car parking bay, out within 3 manoeuvres and off in a forward gear on a 10 metre wide site. It just will not work. So you need a much wider site to be able to get the turning to work. And everyone, I think I've already said it, but I'll just reinforce it now. Everyone says to me, oh, but all we need to do is drive in and we can stack them all because we all know each other, we're all staff, we're all friends. We can go tandem behind each other and we'll just reverse out at the end of the day. Yeah, no, that does not stack up against council's requirements. It's not safe for them to have vehicles reversing out of these car parking spaces all the time. Yes, it may be okay for your staff because they're frequent users of the site, but it's a commercial business. You're going to have visitors just by nature, and those visitors aren't going to be familiar with the site. So it's kind of a safety hazard, a safety issue to have cars reversing out of these properties, which is why council wants you to turn around and exit in a forward gear. So I mentioned road, though that typically is what catches, I'd say probably 30% of the inquiries we see. Maybe this one here catches 50%, it's huge. It's a deal breaker more often than not. So make sure you look at that in the very beginning. Acoustics, okay, so let me just write some stuff down here. 2 metres plus 2 metres. Adjoining any car parking areas, you need to have an acoustic fence. An acoustic fence is essentially a 1.8 metre high, or no, sorry, in this instance, 2 metre, it actually is a little bit higher than standard, 2 metre high gap-free fence. So you need to have an acoustic fence along any parking and manoeuvring areas. Then also, you need to have a 2 metre wide landscape garden bed, like basically a soft stand sort of area, along any residential boundaries. So if you have a house on this side and a house on that side, you need to have a 2 metre wide landscape buffer down there and down there, in addition to the 2 metre high fence, which will sit along there and along the full length there. And that's to protect, well, as the name suggests, it's for acoustic reasons, to protect the amenity of the neighbouring properties. Blah, blah. Man, okay, hours of operation. You essentially can't operate late at night and early in the morning. So you need to make sure it is between 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there is some restrictions. That's not a big deal. Most businesses are happy to operate within those hours. So that's not too dangerous. Okay, location. Let's write the word close and put a big cross next to it. The wording within the scheme essentially says that you can't be located in close proximity to any existing or approved commercial properties. So when I say existing, I mean zoned for commercial purposes or other small-scale non-residential approved properties. The reason is council doesn't want these residential streets turned into commercial hubs. They're happy to accept the odd commercial premises here and there, but they don't want to impact on the neighbours. You think, no one likes to live next door to a shopping centre because you're always going to have more noise, you're always going to have more cars coming and going, all of that sort of stuff. So if you start to cluster all of these uses close together, it's going to, what's the word I'm looking for? Accelerate or accentuate the impacts on the neighbours. So that's why council doesn't want anything in close proximity. Now you're naturally going to ask, what's close proximity? Yeah, there is no definition. We had a pre-lodgement meeting with council yesterday on a job at Toowong. That job is just over 100 metres. I think it's about 140 metres from the nearest commercially zoned premises. That was one of the ones where council was like, yeah, we're kind of fence sitting, we go either way. It could be okay. So at the moment, that's the threshold I'm sort of operating on. It can be different case by case basis across the city, but that sort of gives you a rough idea, something to work with. Basically, you don't want to be within 100 metres of any other commercial properties. Final thing, the big one, need. Now, how am I going to write this one down? Let's go occupancy plus EGs. Now, what do I mean by that? You basically need to demonstrate to council that by letting them, or by them letting you, I should say, break the rules and turn one of these residential zoned properties into a commercial property, that you're not affecting the viability of an existing commercial centre nearby. So you basically need to say you're not going to take away their business. So how do you do that? Well, you need to, more often than not, I'd suggest, engage an economic, let me get words out again, I'm really struggling today, aren't I? Get an economic specialist out to do an assessment of the area. I've been told previously that an occupancy rate, a vacancy rate, I should say, of about 5% is pretty standard. The minute you drop below 5%, it becomes very, very low. So if you could turn around and say, hey, I'll use Toowong as an example, because like I said, I was talking to a council about that site yesterday. If you can say that in Toowong at the moment, the vacancy rate is at 3.75%. That's obviously below 5%. That suggests that there's not a lot of stock on the market for you to actually utilise. That suggests that council's current planning rules or zoning rules, all that sort of stuff, isn't meeting the demand, which obviously works to your advantage. Happy days. If you turn around, however, and you say the current vacancy rate in that area is 8% or 9%, it doesn't quite work to your advantage. It's a bit hard to argue that there's nowhere else for you to go and you have to have this site when just down the road there's a heap of vacancy signs out everywhere. So that's the first thing to look at. Next thing I'd suggest is examples. If you sit here and you say, hey, I've been looking for the last 6 months for a property, my business needs 200 square metres and there is no examples of 200 square metre sites within 5Ks of this property. 5K is probably a bit generous. Let's go 2Ks. 2Ks of this site for me to actually use. There is no sites out there for me that suit my business at this point in time and based on the last 6 months of research we've been doing. If you can say that to council, or if you can go back and say, hey, yeah, there is 2 properties out there at the moment that fit us in terms of size, but we can't go with property A for this reason, or we can't go property B for this reason, then obviously that helps to build your case to argue that there is a need for this development or this proposal to go ahead. So they're the main things that council looks at. Now there's a few things here, I've written myself some cheat sheet notes just to make sure I do cover off on everything this time around. Overlays. Everything I've talked about here today does not consider any overlays. If the property is affected by, let's say, flood overlay, for example, that draws on a whole heap of different requirements that you need to consider. So just keep in mind, we're just talking the basics today. We're not talking about detailed site-specific issues. Risks. You would have seen the word close. Demonstrate that there is a need. These are very wishy-washy, subjective sort of terms. There is no black and white definition of what is close and what need means. As a result, these applications are a little bit risky. And if we jump down here, category of assessment, these trigger impact assessment, which means they're open to public notification. So you need to put a sign on the front of the property, send letters to the neighbours, basically put an advertisement in the local newspaper, opening it up for the opportunity for the neighbours, the local residents. Hey, when I worked in council, I even had one guy in Dubai lodge a submission against one of my jobs. Anyone and anywhere, basically anyone from anywhere can lodge an objection against your proposal. If council receives a barrage of objections, that is obviously going to make them tighten the reins on what they define as close but basically question the need. So it increases the risks for you in terms of getting approval. Sunset clause. Naturally, people always say, but my business is different. You see, I only deal with international clients. I never have visitors coming to my site. And I only have 2 staff members. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, everyone says it to me. Council, unfortunately, cannot issue approvals for specific businesses. Give a bit of context here. Council operates on a complaints-driven basis. They do not have the resources to go around and constantly and actively look for an unlawful or non-lawful is probably a better way, work. As a result, if they sit there and say this approval is just valid for your business, the minute your business moves out, it has to revert back to residential, it's never going to happen. And it's never going to get picked up. That's the reality. Unfortunately, there's been too many situations where council said, okay, yeah, sure, we'll give you an approval for a set time frame to cover just your business. And then they come back 10 years later and they find out that a new business has moved in and they've been operating all this time as political suicide for them then to go, you've got to get out. It's just a nightmare for them to try and enforce these requirements down the track. So having what I call sunset clauses, which is basically time limited clauses or timeframes basically on the approvals, just does not work from a practical perspective. So therefore council has to approve the general use category. So they're approving offices or they're approving shops. They're not approving your business. So keep that in mind. Your business may be unique, but unfortunately this approval can't be unique. Sorry to break you, just crush you down there, but that's the reality. Time. I'm going to say if you're really, really lucky, you might get one of these approvals through within maybe 5 months, 6 months. More likely you're looking at 6 to 12 months. Mainly because we come back to category of assessment. It triggers impact assessment, which means you need to advertise for at least 3 weeks, 15 business days. You then need to process any submissions. There's just so much work in terms of analysing the reports, all that sort of stuff. So it's going to add up in terms of timeframes. You're not going to get an approval out of council the first time around. They're going to have to negotiate with you, so it will add up in terms of timeframes. So don't expect that you can just move in tomorrow. It ain't going to happen that way. Costs. Okay, let me crush your hopes and dreams even further. If I haven't already, let me really crush you here. Okay, so council's assessment fee, you're looking at roughly 4 to 5 grand as a starting point. Obviously, the more floor area you use, the higher their fee goes up. So let's say 5 grand to be safe. Then you need to allow for the cost of getting a good quality set of proposal plans done up. I have no idea what the plans cost. It depends who you go to, but let's just say that's going to add extra cost. Then you need to pay for a private town planner to lodge the application on your behalf. Then you need to provide, unless you can comply with all of the acoustic requirements, which I'm pretty much sure you're not going to be able to comply with all of them. Good luck trying to get a 2 metre wide landscaping buffer along both residential boundaries, or if you've got residential behind as well, you've got to go behind. The sites that I've seen just simply don't have the land area to be able to accommodate that landscaping. If you can't accommodate that landscaping, you've got to engage an acoustic consultant to demonstrate that you won't adversely impact on the neighbours. If you decide that you suddenly want to push the dimensions for parking, which as I said, you're not going to be able to push them too far, but you might have a little bit of movement there. If you want to push for that, you've got to pay for a traffic consultant. That's another cost. If you're servicing, so in terms of getting trucks on there to be able to service these uses, if it's not an obvious tick a box solution, again, traffic engineer to come out. If you get into messy discussions over the use and the need and all that sort of stuff, you've got to pay for an economic consultant. Each one of these consultants can add 2, 3, 4, 5 grand to a proposal. It starts to add up quite significantly. Then, just to top it off, if you happen to get approval for the proposal, you're up for infrastructure charges, which can range from $100 to $200 a square metre. Now, something I should just clarify when it comes to council fees. I mentioned before 4 to 5 grand. That is just for a single small-scale non-residential use. Most of the proposals we see are 2-storey houses, and everyone says I want to keep one level for commercial and the other level for residential. That residential component needs to be reassessed. So basically it needs to be converted from a dwelling house to a dwelling unit. I know you're sitting there rolling your eyes at the moment going, oh, it's a house, it's a house. Technically under the scheme, unfortunately, it's not. That conversion, or seeking council approval for that conversion, costs almost 7 grand. Yeah, it's just a little bit of money. So these costs are huge, especially when you consider the risks involved. So I think that covers everything I want to talk about. Like I said, I don't want to be rude, I don't want to be mean, but I need to give everyone a reality check because I want to make sure that people aren't wasting their time, money, and basically resulting in unnecessary stress by going ahead and looking for these sites and going down tangents that are never going to pay off from. So sorry, I don't mean to be mean. If you do happen to find a site that you think has potential, or if you would like some help trying to find a potential site, then please get in touch. We don't charge for initial advice or investigations. I'm more than happy to have a look. Until next time, thanks for watching.
For all you red tape lovers out there, I have one thing to say. Well, no, actually, I've got three. Number one, the advice provided in these videos is general in nature. It's not site specific. You would be a silly Billy to go and make financial decisions based on this advice without first checking with the town planner. Don't be a silly Billy. Number two, Brisbane town planning is in no way linked to Brisbane City Council. The views expressed in these videos are my own, not council's. So if you don't like them, blame me, not council. Number three, what was my number three? Oh yeah, the views expressed in these videos are accurate at the time of recording. If you're watching this video back 10 years from now, the views may not be so accurate. That's all.